Right. I call the Minister to move motion number 9 on the prevention and the suppression on terrorism. The Minister to move. Secretary of State. Home Secretary.
I beg to move that the Terrorism Act 2000 Proscribed Organisations Amendment Order 2019, laid before this House yesterday, be approved. Mr Deputy Speaker, the UK has often felt the sharp pain of terrorism in recent years. Tragically, British families have lost loved ones in Manchester and London, in Tunisia, in France, in Spain. As Home Secretary, I am determined to do all I can to stop this happening again, to protect the lives and liberty of our citizens wherever they are in the world, and to preserve the international rule of law. Proscription is a vital tool to help us disrupt terrorist networks and those who support them. The loss of 30 British lives in Sousse in 2015 shows the importance of international cooperation. Terrorism is a global threat, and we must work closely with other countries to tackle it. We cannot and we will not ignore acts of terror that are committed overseas. To do so would make us all less secure. We must send a strong message to our citizens and the world that we will never condone terrorism, and that the warped ideologies of these ruthless groups have absolutely no place in our society. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I strongly welcome this order by the Home Secretary. He's standing up for what is morally right for our country, and he's standing up against terrorism. This has not become before time, this banning of Hezbollah. Could I just ask him what happens if these groups rebadge themselves under a different name, and what action he will take?
Mr Speaker, I welcome the support of my right honourable friend, Mr Deputy Speaker, and in answer to his question, that is something that we monitor with the help of officials at the Home Office, and if that does happen, then we will bring a relevant order to Parliament, as we actually just recently did with other terrorist groups that had been previously proscribed. So it's something that we try to stay on top of and make sure that there is no way for these terrorist groups to dodge prescription by the UK government. I'll give way.
Secretary of State for giving way, and indeed congratulate him on the motion that he's bringing to the House tonight. Members in this bench, of course, need no lecture about the history of Irish terrorism. We have 3 plaques to members who were murdered from Northern Ireland or by Irish terrorists in the past. However, with regards to this specific action tonight, will the Secretary of State be prepared to extend this motion to include members of the Muslim Brotherhood?
Mr Deputy Speaker, I can tell the honourable gentleman that of course there are a number of groups that are already proscribed. I think well over 70, including of course a number of terrorist groups related to Northern Ireland terrorism. The honourable gentleman has mentioned a specific group. All I would say is that we do keep this whole area of terrorism and groups and which ones are active under review, and should we feel that we need to come back to Parliament with a further order, we wouldn't hesitate in doing that. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Thank you for giving way and congratulate him on this excellent move. Let's be clear about Hezbollah. They are a group that promotes Jew hate, they are a group that promotes murder, and they are a group that will never, in any circumstances, recognise the only democratic state in the Middle East. In that context, does my honourable friend, the Home Secretary, share my surprise and confusion over why the front bench opposite cannot support the proscription of a group that promotes murder and racism?
Mr Speaker, I do very much understand everything my honourable friend has said, and I mean, I can't obviously speak for the views of the official opposition. They will get an opportunity in a moment to set out their views, and the public will be able to draw their own conclusions. I'll give way one more time to my right honourable friend, and then I'll make some progress and give way again later.
Grateful to my radical friend for giving way, and I strongly commend and praise him for this action that he's taking this evening. He spoke about the powerful message that this sends out about this view of this government towards terrorism. But does my right honourable friend agree with me that it isn't just about sending out that important message that there is no safe space for terror groups on British soil, but it's also about the practical impact of the measure in front of us tonight to shut down fundraising activities and ensure that support for terror in this country is closed down?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, my right honourable friend is, of course, absolutely right. The whole point of prescription, why it was set out in the Act in 2000, the process, and since then successive governments have come to this dispatch box and recommended that a number of organisations are prescribed. It has real practical action on the ground, for example, not just to stop people from being members of the organisations that are prescribed, but of supporting them in any way, including giving them any kind of publicity or oxygen for their vile means. I will make some progress, and I will give way to honourable members in a moment. But I will give way in a moment. I just want to make a little bit of progress. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is why I'm laying this order to prescribe Hezbollah in its entirety and crack down on several other terror organisations. Now, subject to the will of Parliament, this will make membership of any part of Hezbollah a criminal offence in the UK. It will give police the power to tackle those who fly their gun-emblazoned flag on our streets, inflaming community tensions. It will give us more power to disrupt the activity of an organisation who are committed to armed combat, who violently oppose the Israeli people, who destabilise the fragile Middle East and help to prolong the brutal Syrian conflict, and whose attacks have reached into Europe. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we will not hesitate to prescribe groups where they pose a terrorist threat. The prescription order... I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Thank you very much for giving way, and I strongly support the decision he's taken. The statement I've seen from the opposition makes a distinction between the political and the military wings of Hezbollah, and it demands proof that the so-called political wing falls foul of prescription criteria. Could he confirm that the Hezbollah itself makes no such distinction, that it's an entirely plastic, entirely artificial distinction, that they are one and the same?
Absolutely right.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, it's an important point for my honourable friend, as I shall come to in a moment. I think it's fair to say Hezbollah itself laughs at that distinction. They mock it. They do not understand why some other countries have continued to make this, in effect, an artificial distinction, and it's therefore a very important point my honourable friend has raised. I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
Can I congratulate the Home Secretary on this decision? And does he agree with me that it's one thing to engage with terrorists in an attempt to get them to renounce violence and pursue entirely political aims, and quite another to engage with terrorists to show solidarity with them and to show support for them? And does he agree with me that honourable members in the past of this House who have done this should take every opportunity they can to apologise, not to hide on occasions such as this?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I very much agree with the honourable gentleman. Can I thank him for his support for this order, but also his passionate words. And he's absolutely right. If there are, perhaps there are, if there are honourable members that in the past have thought of Hezbollah in a positive light, today it actually is an opportunity, a fresh opportunity for them to demonstrate that they stand against terrorism in all its forms, whether it's through Hezbollah or any of the other organisations that I'll be prescribing today. I will give way.
I thank him for giving way. It is not the truth of this that there is not the slightest shred of evidence, after decades of European and British contact with Hezbollah, that they have in any way moderated the group and that it is still one official group.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend makes an important point about the evidence, and some of it I will come on to in terms of the groups that we are recommending are prescribed today. But with regards to Hezbollah, It is actually quite clear from open source reporting about their involvement, for example, in the Syrian conflict on the side of the Syrian regime, and how it has led to countless deaths and continues to do so in that most horrid conflict. Mr Deputy, I will make some progress and I will give way to honourable members in a moment. The prescription order before the House today is the 23rd under the Terrorism Act of 2000. If agreed by this House and the other place, it will ban 3 groups that I deem a threat to this country. Firstly, Hezbollah, also known as the Party of God. This order extends the prescription of Hezbollah's military wing to cover the group in its entirety. There have long been calls to ban the whole group, with the distinction between the two factions derided as smoke and mirrors. Hezbollah themselves have laughed off the suggestion that there is a difference. I've carefully considered the evidence and I'm satisfied they are one and the same, with the entire organisation linked to terrorism. As I'm sure honourable members will be aware, Hezbollah are committed to armed resistance to the State of Israel. They have the largest non-state military force in Lebanon. The House will appreciate that I cannot go into the details in terms of current intelligence, but I can say that Hezbollah has been reported in many open sources as being linked to or claiming responsibility for many atrocities. These include a suicide bomb attack on a Buenos Aires Jewish community centre in 1994 that left 85 people dead and hundreds injured. The bloodshed came just 2 years after an attack on the Israeli embassy in that same city, which killed 29 people. Hezbollah's involvement in the Syrian war since 2012 continues to prolong the conflict and the brutal repression of the Syrian people. In 2016, they helped besiege Aleppo, stopping humanitarian aid reaching parts of the city for 6 months, putting thousands at risk of mass starvation. Their actions continue to destabilise the fragile Middle East. I will give way to my honourable friend.
I'm very grateful to the Home Secretary giving way, and can I say to him how pleased the constituents of Hendon are tonight hearing this news. But can he confirm to me that at the annual Al-Quds rally, we will not see the flags of this anti-Semitic organisation continue to be paraded on the streets of London?
Mr Deputy Speaker, first of all, can I thank my honourable friend for his words, but what I can confirm to him that if this order passes through Parliament tonight as a proscribed organisation, and for any of the proscribed organisations that are presented in the order tonight, it will be a criminal offence for anyone to wear the clothing or to carry any articles, including a flag, in public which will arouse reasonable suspicion that an individual is a member or a supporter of a proscribed organisation. I will give way to my honourable friend.
Can I congratulate the Home Secretary on overcoming this nonsense about there being separate military and political wings? Hizballah themselves have said, and I quote, "We don't have a military wing and a political one. We don't have Hezbollah on the one hand and a resistance party on the other. Every element of Hezbollah, from commanders to members, are in the service of the resistance." May I congratulate the Home Secretary for laying this order tonight.
Mr Deputy Speaker, can I thank my honourable friend, and again he has highlighted this fallacy that has existed about different wings in this organisation. This organisation only has one wing, and that is a wing of terrorism. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Thank you. I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. He's absolutely right that, as it's called, the Muqawama, the resistance in Lebanon, is indeed entirely part of the single organisation. Would he also agree with me, however, that what this organisation has done with the backing of Iran in Syria, not just in areas of the Middle East, but actually with Syrian support in places like Argentina that he's also cited, is the spread of anti-Semitism, the spread of repression of ideas, the spread of liberty all over the world. And this is an act of resistance that he's not only right to take in the UK, but he's joining with the Dutch and he's joining with others around Europe who have taken this action already. Would he also encourage others to follow suit?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I very much agree with the points made by my honourable friend. And as he says, there are other countries that have taken the same action as we are proposing today, and I'll mention a couple of those in a moment. But I hope that others, including our allies across the world, are listening, and those that still maintain this distinction between military and political wing will listen carefully and perhaps be encouraged to take the same action that we are taking today. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
To the Home Secretary, and just to build on that point, he will recognise the importance of the Five Eyes organisation and know that the United States and Canada already have made the decision that we are making tonight, and still there is work to be done with our allies within Australia and New Zealand. Will he specifically engage with our Five Eyes partners to ensure that there is a uniformity of approach and a collective will to fight against Hezbollah?
Madam Deputy Speaker, the honourable gentleman mentions our closest allies when it comes to matters of security and intelligence, and he will know that there's a very strong regular dialogue and conversation with all those countries, our friends in the Five Eyes alliance. And I hope that, again, that they will be listening carefully, those that haven't proscribed Hezbollah in full, and it is something that I intend to bring up in the Five Eyes Country Ministerial, which I will be chairing and hosting in the UK later this year. I'll give way to the old gentleman.
Thank you, Secretary, for giving way, and I very much welcome his statement today and the clear leadership and decisive action that he has taken on this matter, which is long overdue, and very much commend him for it. But would he agree with me that the action that he is taking sends a very clear message to the Jewish communities right across our country that there is no place in this nation for anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic organisations?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I couldn't agree more with my honourable friend. As I mentioned earlier, sadly, Hezbollah has identified as one of its biggest targets the state of Israel and its people. It has long had a hatred of people that are of the Jewish faith. Of course, that is absolutely unacceptable, and we hope that today's action not just sends a strong signal, but will actually help by denigrating this group and making it weaker in terms of support from anyone that might be based in the UK, help to protect our friends in Israel and give comfort to Jews across the world. I will make some progress, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I will give way to honourable friends in a moment. I will do that. Madam Deputy Speaker, the extent of this group, that's Hezbollah, their entire involvement in terror has long been debated in this House. The UK government first proscribed Hezbollah's external security organisation in 2001. In 2008, this was extended to include the entire military wing, the so-called Jihad Council, and all units that were operating under it. We took this further by designating Hezbollah's military wing under the Terrorist Asset Freezing Act of 2010. The European Union followed suit in 2013 after 6 people were murdered in the Bulgarian bus attack. The USA, Canada, the Netherlands, Bahrain and the Gulf Cooperation Council already proscribed Hezbollah in its entirety as a terrorist organisation. This government has continued to call on Hezbollah to end its armed status. They have not listened. Indeed, their behaviour has actually escalated. The distinction between their political and military wings is now untenable. It is right that we act now to proscribe this entire organisation. I will give way.
To the Home Secretary, if we've learnt anything from the new Labour years, it is that proscribing clerics or individual organisations in and of themselves is not enough. It should be part of a wider strategy with allies. So given we've just had the joint EU Council Arab League summit, how many of our allies at that summit intend to follow the government's lead?
First of all, the honourable gentleman is absolutely correct about just prescribing a terrorist group. Of course, is not enough. It is part of the toolbox, the toolkit that we have to fight terrorism. There are many other tools that are deployed. So, for example, the recent counter-terrorism and border security bill, now the Act, the measures that are taken through legislation to try in other ways to fight terrorism. The honourable gentleman has asked me about what other countries, especially at the recent summit, may have followed suit. As I mentioned, the Gulf Cooperation Council has many members, has long proscribed Hezbollah in its entirety. Bahrain has proscribed Hezbollah as well. And I'm sure that through today's action, many countries will be interested to know, and we work closely with allies as to how and why we are taking this action, and perhaps they will follow suit. I will give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way, and can I welcome his decision on Hizbollah. But will you also agree with me that we need to redouble our efforts to cut off sources of financial supply to groups like Hizbollah, which are to do with money laundering and so on, by working with our allies like the US? Would you agree with that?
Yes, Madam Deputy Speaker, I very much agree with my honourable friend, and that is why, for example, under the Terrorist Asset Freezing Act of 2010, we have taken action against Hezbollah and other proscribed terrorist organisations, and we are always looking to see what more we can do in terms of going after assets and those that help with fundraising, and we try to do this work together with our allies, which gives us a much greater chance of success in terms of cutting off financing. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. It's only 13 months since his right honourable friend, our right honourable friend, the Minister for Security and Economic Crime, was in this House having a rather more difficult time making the opposite arguments around the prescription of this, and I would be extremely interested to know what has changed in the course of the last 13 months, other than himself, for the government to change its position.
It's a very good question from my honourable friend, and he will know that we will, first of all, constantly keep under review the different terrorist organisations and groups, particularly ones that we have prescribed some part of before. And we would look at both secret intelligence, but also there will be more open source information. So, for example, my honourable friend asks me what has changed. I think in terms of open source information, it's self-evident that Hezbollah has gotten more involved, more drawn in the Syrian conflict, and is responsible for the death and injury of countless numbers of innocent civilians. We will also look at advice from officials. There is a prescription group of officials that have made up cross-government departments, not just the Home Office, but including, for example, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and we would listen to their expert advice. And they have been very clear on this issue of Hezbollah, very clear on their advice. In terms of the tests that have set out in the Terrorism Act of 2000, Hezbollah clearly is a candidate for prescription because it meets all those tests. I will give way to the right honourable gentleman.
Yeah. The Home Secretary giving way. Following on from the point by his right honourable friend about what has changed, he gave a detailed answer to that, and I'm grateful for him. But in terms of the political changes, has his decision had any relationship with the problem of government formation in Lebanon, where Hezbollah ministers are having problems with the Prime Minister in trying to form a government? Has that been part of his decision-making?
The short answer to the right honourable gentleman is no. We have, as the UK government, we have had for a number of years a long-standing policy of no contact with Hezbollah, and that in a way has made this decision more straightforward in terms of any potential impact in Lebanon. Our ties with the Lebanese government, our support with Lebanon, for Lebanon, for example, through the FCO, but also through DFID, is strong. And whilst there has been a need to just make sure it's compliant with this order, that is largely untouched, and that strength of that relationship with the legitimate government of Lebanon will remain. I will give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way, and I commend him for the decision he's taking and bringing to this House. My Jewish constituents will be warmly welcoming this decision tonight, but actually, so will the Christian refugees from Lebanon, who have also been attacked and targeted by Hezbollah. We should not forget those individuals. One of the challenges that the police have faced in this country is that when we have the Al-Quds marches, which have been mentioned by my honourable friend from Hendon, the police have said we can't interfere because people put the flags of Hezbollah
up and they say it's the political wing of Hezbollah. Will this now make sure that the police will take action against those people parading those flags? And will he also make sure that we freeze all the assets of Hezbollah in the UK and encourage our allies to do the same thing?
Very good. First of all, on his, Madam Deputy Speaker, on my honourable friend's last question first, we have already taken steps to freeze assets of terrorist groups, but of course we will continue to make sure that always remains the case. On his first point, he's right to point out that there have been many victims of many different faiths of Hezbollah, not just Jewish victims, as he's pointed out, Christian victims, but also many Muslims have been murdered by Hezbollah as well. And when it comes to displaying, whether it's flags or clothing or any item that might be connected with Hezbollah or any other proscribed terrorist organisation for that matter, it will be a criminal offence. From now on, it will be a criminal offence, which gives the police and the Crown Prosecution Service the ability to act in a way that up until now they have been prevented from doing so. Now, yes, I will.
When this House debated this issue a few months ago, every single backbencher advocated the full proscription of Hezbollah, and it was deeply regrettable that at that stage neither front bench did. I welcome the change of heart by the government. Does he share my deep regret that it's not shared by the opposition front bench?
Well, can I welcome the support of my right honourable friend, but I will just reserve my judgment on the opposition, wait to hear from the Shadow Minister on his thoughts, but it is interesting already. We have seen, I think some honourable members may have seen a press release from the official opposition which suggests that they are against the proscription of Hezbollah. I'm sure that's actually not the case, and I'm sure the Shadow Minister will tell us that must be some kind of typo in the press release, and they are actually absolutely committed to fighting terrorism because they know that's what the British people want to see. And it actually would be wise for the opposition to note in that regard that ever since the 2010 Terrorism Act, any prescription order that has been brought to this dispatch box by any government, Labour or Conservative, has never been opposed by the official opposition. They have supported the banning of any organisation that has been suggested. If it actually turns out, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the Labour Party tonight objects against the banning of Hezbollah, that will be a first in this Parliament, and the British people can judge for themselves. Madam Deputy Speaker, secondly, this order will prescribe Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam wal Muslimin, also known as JNIM. This will include its aliases Nusrat al-Islam and Nusrat al-Islam wal Muslimin, as well as its media arm known as Azalak. JNIM was established in March 2017 as a federation of al-Qaeda-aligned groups in Mali. It aims to eradicate government and Western presence from the Western Sahel region, including parts of Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger. In place, they want to impose a strict Salafist interpretation of Sharia law. To this end, they attack Western interests across the region. They kidnap Western nationals to raise ransom money. 3 civilians and 2 military personnel were killed in a 2017 attack on a tourist hotspot in Mali. And Azalak then proudly announced these atrocities and claimed responsibility. JNIM is already designated by the US and by the UN, and I have no hesitation in doing the same. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, this order will ban Ansarul Islam. Its alias Ansarul Islam Lil Irshad wal Jihad will also be prescribed. This group wants to take control of the Fulani Kingdom in Jelaguji in Burkina Faso and Mali, and it wants to impose its own strict interpretation of Sharia law. They announced their existence in 2016 by claiming responsibility for an attack on an army outpost in Burkina Faso that killed at least 12 soldiers. Their methods include attacks on police stations, on schools and public officials. The predominantly Fulani organisation often target other ethnic groups, leading to mass displacement. Ansarul Islam is already designated as a terror group by the US. It is highly likely that they are supported by Jainim, and given their murderous actions, it is only right that we outlaw them here in the UK too. I will one more time.
I'm very grateful for the Home Secretary giving way. He's absolutely right to prescribe those two organisations operating in Africa. But is he aware that the former independent review of terrorist legislation, Lord Anson of Ipswich, in a debate in the other place in December, said that at least 14 of the 74 organisations prescribed at the moment no longer, and I quote his words so I'm not taking them out of context, are not concerned in terrorism and therefore do not meet the minimum statutory condition for prescription. In putting this order before the House, did he consider de-prescribing organisations which no longer meet that criteria?
I can tell the honourable gentleman that, as I mentioned earlier, we keep this whole area under review, not just in terms of which organisations may need to be added and prescribed, but also which ones may need to be removed. And organisations have been removed in the past, and it's not every year that organisations are added, but we do constantly keep them under review. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I have no doubt that all three of the prescriptions are in the national interest. Under Section 3 of the Terrorism Act 2000, I have the power to prescribe an organisation if I believe it is concerned with terrorism. There are currently 74 international terrorist organisations that are prescribed under the Act, alongside 14 connected to Northern Ireland prescribed under separate legislation. I only exercise the power after thoroughly reviewing all the evidence that is available. I consult colleagues across government, including intelligence agencies and law enforcement, and the cross-government prescription review group supports me in this decision-making process. Now, once prescribed, an organisation is outlawed and is unable to operate in the UK. It becomes a criminal offence to be a member of, to support them, or to encourage the support of others. Prescription makes it harder for a banned group to fundraise and to recruit. Their assets can become subject to seizure and terrorist property, and those linked to them may be excluded from the UK using immigration powers. Once a group is proscribed, it is also an offence to display their symbols in public, to brandish them on flags and clothes to indicate or to encourage support. Madam Deputy Speaker, earlier this month, this House passed the Counter-Terrorism and Border Security Act. This strengthens these powers by also making it an offence to publish an image of such an item, and it extends extraterritorial jurisdiction so that UK nationals and residents can be prosecuted in our courts for doing so overseas. This will help us further bear down on online propaganda and terrorist grooming, enabling us to act when a foreign fighter uses social media to reach back to the UK to build support for their terrorist organisation. Madam Deputy Speaker, may I also take this opportunity to update the House on another order that I laid yesterday. This came into effect today, and it outlaws aliases of two already prescribed organisations, Daesh and the Revolutionary People's Liberation Party. We will not allow these or any other groups to continue to operate merely by changing their name. Banning these aliases will leave these groups with nowhere left to hide. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have outlined the terrorist threat posed by these groups. To ignore this would be to fail in our duty to protect our citizens and our allies. It can only be right that we add them to the list of prescribed organisations. The time has come to act, and I will not flinch from doing so. Subject to the agreement of this House and the other place, the order will come into effect on Friday, the 1st of March.
The question is motion number 9 as on the order paper. Nick Thomas-Symonds.
Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'm grateful to the Home Secretary for his remarks, and I would also thank him for the letter that he sent to my right honourable friend, the Shadow Home Secretary, setting out his decision. And I also welcome the remarks he's just made about the banning of aliases in addition to principal names. And can I say just at the outset and make clear that the opposition will not be opposing the motion before the House tonight. But what I would like, I'm sure the Home Secretary would appreciate, I will be providing scrutiny of the decision that he'd made, as he would fully expect. Now, Section 3, subsection 5 of the Terrorism Act 2000 sets out the parameters of what is deemed to be an organisation that's concerned in terrorism. They are that it commits or participates in acts of terrorism, prepares for terrorism, promotes or encourages terrorism, or is otherwise concerned in terrorism. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, let me just briefly touch on each of the organisations the Home Secretary has mentioned. Firstly, Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam wal Muslimin, otherwise referred to as JNIM. From the information provided by the Home Secretary, the group was established in March 2017 as a federation of al-Qaeda-aligned groups and has operations in northern and central Mali, northern Burkina Faso and western Niger. Its claimed responsibility, as the Home Secretary has set out, for a number of atrocities from the 18th of June 2017 to the 29th of June 2018. Secondly, on Ansarul Islam, which announced its existence in December of 2016. Its overarching aim is to establish dominance in northern Burkina Faso and central Mali, and its claimed responsibility for an appalling attack on an army outpost in Burkina Faso which killed at least 12 soldiers. I think the Home Secretary has been very clear in his letter that Ansarul Islam seeks to eradicate Burkinabe's state presence from Burkina Faso's northern regions. Third, the Home Secretary has indicated that Hezbollah will now be proscribed in its entirety, and indeed in his remarks, the Home Secretary gave a brief history when the then Labour government prescribed its external security organisation in 2001, and in 2008 its military apparatus was being prescribed. And I do say to the Home Secretary, he made the point quite rightly, that these orders have never been opposed by any opposition during that period. They won't be tonight. And indeed, I said in a debate in this House on the 25th of January last year in respect of that government position, when of course then it was that Hezbollah's military wing only was prescribed, the opposition absolutely condemned the violence, and we continue to support the position of the government which was then set out. I was clear in that condemnation then, and I am again now. I will give way to them.
Does the Labour front bench support the proscription of Hezbollah in its entirety?
Well, I've just set out the position. We will not be opposing. We are not opposing the motion. But what I am seeking to do is to provide scrutiny of the government's position. It's a perfectly reasonable position for the. I'll make some progress, but I will come back to the honourable lady. Now, the Home Secretary stated in his letter setting out the reasons that Hezbollah as a political entity in Lebanon has won votes in legitimate elections and forms part of the Lebanese government. It has the largest non-state military force in the country. In the same debate that I referred to in January last year, the Security Minister said, and I quote, "We believe that the best way to weaken Hezbollah in the region and further afield is to have a strong state of Lebanon. The stronger the state of Lebanon, which represents multi-faith groups, has a democracy and speakers of parliament and recognises the individual religious minorities in the country, the weaker Hezbollah will be. It is not in our interest to have a weak, fractured Lebanon." He's, of course, correct about that. Now, I totally appreciate, obviously, the strong views on this matter, and it has previously been the view of the Foreign Office for many years that the proscription of the political wing, which is part of the elected Lebanese government, would make it difficult to maintain normal diplomatic relations with Lebanon or work with the government there on humanitarian issues, including those facing Syrian refugees in part of the country controlled by Hezbollah. Now, the Home Secretary, I'll finish this point and I'll come back to the the Home Secretary said in his remarks about ongoing diplomatic engagement with the government of Lebanon that he would be looking at whether it was compliant with the order. And I would appreciate if he would set out in more detail how that engagement is to continue. And I'll give way to my friend.
Say to the opposition front bench that British officials can still meet with their Lebanese counterparts. The explanatory notes to the Terrorism Act of 2000, and maybe the Home Secretary will confirm this a little later on, clarified that the arrangement of genuinely benign meetings with proscribed groups are permitted. Such meetings are interpreted as those at which the terrorist activities of the group are not promoted or encouraged. For example, a meeting designed to encourage a designated group to engage in a peace process. So I think that really covers the point that the honourable gentleman has just made.
Well, I'm very grateful for the intervention. I'm sure the Home Secretary will come back to that in due course. The reason, Madam Deputy Speaker, I raised the issue of the prescription... I'll finish the next. I will come back to the honourable gentleman. Clearly, we have to make decisions based on clear evidence. And I raise that because, of course, it's for the Home Secretary on this, as with any other prescription description of any government, to demonstrate their objective, impartial decisions driven by new and clear evidence. And I'm sure he'd be keen to set out that evidence to the House. But could I just put this point? I think this comes back to the point that was made by the Honourable Lady, that the Security Minister last year was very clear when we had a debate on this 13 months ago, that his concern at that time was that the full prescription could lead to a weak and fractured Lebanon. Now, clearly that can't be the assessment of the Home Secretary now, and it would just be, I think, useful for the whole House if he were to set out why he thinks that judgment of the Security Minister from last year has now changed. I promised the honourable gentleman, so I'll...
I appreciate the honourable gentleman giving way. If I can just quote the opposition spokesman. He said, the opposition spokesman, according to what was in the newspapers today, says that ministers have not yet provided any clear evidence to suggest that there should be a change to prescribing Hezbollah, and then says decisions on the prescription of organisations as terror groups are supposed to be made on the advice of civil servants based on clear evidence that those organisations fall foul. The Home Secretary must therefore now demonstrate that this decision was taken in an objective way and driven by clear and new evidence, not by his leadership ambitions. Is this not the wrong way to treat something as serious as this and turn it into something about party politics? And given that he's heard the evidence and the opening statement of my right honourable friend, surely he should get up at the dispatch box and say, yes, we're right to ban this terrorist organisation from our country.
I'll just say to the honourable gentleman, I'm simply asking the question which is not unreasonable as to what has changed. And a lot of the evidence that's been put forward today we heard 13 months ago, and very concerning it is too. But I just asked the direct question as to what's changed, and I don't see it's unreasonable to provide a scrutiny of the decision that's being taken. Now, and I'll be clear to the Home Secretary, I'm going to complete this. I've worked with, throughout my time in this role, I've worked with the government. I've worked with the government on the Counter-Terrorism and Border Security Act, and I think that working together has enhanced the security of our citizens. What I do here at the dispatch box today is to scrutinise this decision carefully and hold the Home Secretary to account, which I believe is the role of a responsible opposition.
I beg the honourable gentleman's. Well, like others, I thought he was giving way, but I'm very pleased that he has concluded. Thank you. There will be a limit on backbench speeches of 3 minutes. Mr. Stephen Crabb.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I will be brief, not least because I think actually all of the main arguments and the main points have been covered. The Home Secretary has been incredibly generous in the interventions that he's taken, and I think we've had a good debate and discussion so far. I'll also be brief, Madam Deputy Speaker, because you've asked us to, and that is the rule that we're operating under this evening. I join with everyone else in praising the Home Secretary for the action that he's taking this evening. It is typically strong and clear-sighted of him. I think it's a powerful demonstration of the values that he brings to the important office that he holds, but I also think it's an important demonstration of this government's values in action. And I know that he's worked very closely with the Foreign Secretary and other ministerial colleagues in bringing us to this place. I listened with great interest to the remarks from the opposition front bench, and I know the honourable member opposite very well. He is someone who is intelligent, he's fair-minded. I was concerned, because yes, he's absolutely right, he has a duty to scrutinise and ask the difficult questions and ask about the evidence. What we didn't hear from him this evening was a message saying they support the action that we're about to take to proscribe Hezbollah in its entirety. It's one thing to say, well, we're not going to oppose because these measures are never opposed by the opposition. And it's one thing to say, well, we have a duty to scrutinise. What we want to hear from the opposition tonight is that they actively support this important measure that we are taking. Now, my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, covered in some detail the history of the proscription of Hezbollah, its military operations, its military wing. Numerous colleagues here have made the point that many of us in this chamber, on this side of the House, and some on the opposite benches opposite benches as well, never regarded the distinction between a military wing and a civilian wing of Hezbollah as anything other than an artificial construct. So we strongly welcome the decision finally that's being taken to ban Hezbollah in its entirety. It was the Home Secretary himself earlier who said that Hezbollah actually laugh at us when we in this House and we as a government have tried to make this point that there is some distinction. As Hezbollah's Deputy Secretary General Sheikh Naim Qassam has stated in October 2012, he himself said, we don't have a military wing and a political wing. We don't have Hezbollah on one hand and the resistance party on the other. Every element of Hezbollah, from commanders to members, as well as our various capabilities, are in the service of the resistance, and we have nothing but the resistance as a priority. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, members will know exactly what they mean when they talk about resistance. Resistance means Jew-hating, it means Israel-hating, and tonight this government, this House is taking action to ban Hezbollah in its entirety and to stand up against that kind of vile rhetoric.
Joanna Cherry.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's clear that Hezbollah is an organisation that has been intimately involved in terrorist attacks and the killing of civilians. And this, of course, should be met with unequivocal condemnation from the international community and from this House. As others have said, in the 2006 war, Hezbollah fired thousands of rockets indiscriminately and at times deliberately at civilian areas in northern Israel, killing at least 39 civilians, and that's according to Human Rights Watch. And in the conflict in Syria, we have seen Hezbollah forces fight alongside Assad's Syrian government groups, and we all know the terrible atrocities that they have been guilty of. And of course, these events take place against a growing climate of anti-Semitism across the world, which the SNP condemns utterly and unequivocally. We entirely condemn the violent actions of Hezbollah in Israel and Syria. And whatever the rights and wrongs, Madam Deputy Speaker, of the Israel-Palestine situation, and many of us, including myself, hold serious concerns about human rights violations in the occupied territory and the Gaza Strip, notwithstanding those concerns, they should never be used as any kind of purported justification for attacks on the people of Israel or Jewish people across the world, or indeed abuse against them. And the Scottish National Party and the Scottish Government have consistently condemned obstacles to progress, both in the peace process, both indiscriminate rocket attacks on Israel and also the continued expansion of illegal settlements in the occupied territories. Now, as others have alluded to, there was a detailed debate on the topic of the proscription of Hezbollah, the full proscription, if I may call it that, in this House on the 25th of January. And I had the benefit, Madam Deputy Speaker, of reading that debate earlier today and discussing it with my honourable friend, the member for Cumbernauld, Kilsyth, and Kirkentilick, who spoke in that debate. And very serious concern was raised by members across the House about the statements and beliefs of Hezbollah as a whole, their anti-Semitism and their avowed desire for the destruction of the State of Israel. And as I've already said, these concerns are shared by the Scottish National Party. So my only purpose in speaking today is my concern to elicit from the Home Secretary precisely what it is that has changed since the 25th of January last year, when his honourable friend, the Minister of State for Security, spoke so eloquently, went through the history of the proscription of the military wing, which we've heard about, but went on to say that at that time, although the proscription of Hezbollah in its entirety was kept under review, the government at that stage wished to maintain a balance. And as was pointed out in the debate on the 25th of January last year by my honourable friend, the member for Cumbernauld, Kilsyth and Kirkentilick East, other countries have also sought to maintain that balance, including two of the members of the Five Eyes, as another honourable member said, and the European Union. And in response to the question from my honourable friend, the member for Glasgow South, I wasn't sure that the Home Secretary was able to elicit whether any other countries have changed their position. So, as the honourable gentleman who speaks for the official opposition said, it is the role of opposition to ask questions and to scrutinise. So, I'm not interested in defending Hezbollah. Of course I'm not. And I've made my party's condemnation of their activities crystal clear. I simply wish to elicit from the Home Secretary what specifically has led to the government's change of mind since the 25th of January 2018, so that I might better understand this decision today. I also am concerned that the Home Secretary clarify for us what specific arrangements he's put in place to make sure that diplomatic channels are kept open, not with Hezbollah, but with the Lebanese government and Lebanese parliamentarians in order to maintain stability in Lebanon. And I'd also like to seek from the Home Secretary, and I'm sure he will give me a confirmation of the government's commitment to use its influence to help revitalise the peace process in the Middle East and to find a way to break the terrible political deadlock there and start to move towards bringing an end to the conflict. Thank you.
Hear, hear. I'm going to do something very unusual because the front benches have taken far less time than I anticipated. Then, with apologies to the honourable gentleman for Pressley Pembrokeshire, we're now going to have a time limit of 5 minutes. Crispin Blunt.
The lucky recipient of being following the right honourable gentleman for Pembrokeshire. What I want to say here is plainly this has been a matter of careful consideration for a long time about how we should deal with Hezbollah. And I don't think anyone has been any doubt that the constructive ambiguity of the previous position of this differentiation between the military and the political wing has been made crystal clear by a number of contributions here, effectively a piece of constructive ambiguity, exactly that. There were, of course, reasons for the government creating that constructive ambiguity. And what I would, a contribution I want to make into this debate is those considerations that until now have dictated the scale of proscription of Hezbollah, that those considerations should not be lost and those factors as we go forward. And of course, Hezbollah are an important part of the government coalition in Lebanon. I think they provide 13 out of the 68 members of parliament in the governing coalition. There are important development objectives, particularly in the south of Lebanon, where Hezbollah has the core of its support from the poorer Shia communities in the Lebanon. And many of those development projects will be delivered with the assistance of the local authorities and the local councils that are elected there. And it's going to be very difficult for deputy officials to deliver those projects in the way that they have been if they are then suddenly find they're going to have to identify which local officials are flying a Hezbollah badge to get elected, which is largely necessary in that part of Lebanon, given the political popularity of Hezbollah, whether we like it or not. But our aid programme to that part of Lebanon is extremely important, and it would be, given in particular, the assistance that we've given the Lebanon in dealing with the Syrian refugee crisis as well, it would be possibly damaging to British interest if we allowed this prescription then to affect the effective delivery of course.
The argument that we need to not prescribe in its entirety Hezbollah in order to help development projects in Lebanon seems to me a little bit tenuous. Is he arguing that in order to maintain those development projects in Lebanon, we have to allow an organisation to parade on the streets of our capital city with its terrorist symbol and the gun, and to intimidate and threaten the Jewish community and others in our country?
I'm not. What I'm saying is that the considerations that will have led to the United Kingdom's policy until now, until we make this change tonight, that those considerations ought to be taken into account. Some of the practical implications of trying to deliver very much needed development assistance, particularly in southern Lebanon, and development assistance to assist with the tidal wave of refugees that have come into Lebanon displaced by the Syrian crisis, are going to cause complexity in the delivery of those aid programmes. And we ought to need to take those into consideration, and we're going to have to work out how we are going to do it. That's got nothing to do with waving flags in the United Kingdom and giving. All I'm saying is there were reasons for our policy until today, and I wouldn't want those reasons to be lost in this consideration. So we want to make sure that we don't cripple the schemes where there are cooperative schemes, and I already referred to the number of programmes in the south of the country and the municipalities there that will contain people elected under the Hezbollah party label. But of course, the stability of Lebanon is also an extremely important consideration, Madam Deputy Speaker. And anyone who pretends they understand the politics of Lebanon has just almost immediately demonstrated that they don't understand it. It is immensely difficult to get under the surface of that. And some of that complexity is known to me, from the visits I have made to the Lebanon, and perhaps the most impressive one was in 2006, immediately in the wake of the Israeli attack on Lebanon and the destruction of much of its infrastructure, where the driver who was assigned to myself and two other parliamentary colleagues at the time was a Hezbollah supporter. But his drink of choice was vodka, and his occupation of choice was clubbing, which does go to suggest that it is not quite the same religiously motivated organisation all the way through. Hezbollah has been seen by the Lebanese Shia population as the most effective representatives of that population. Of course, that has meant, with the history of the terrorism that has been associated with it, that we are going to make this measure this evening. But we do have to engage with the practical reality that Hezbollah does represent, at the moment, regrettable though that may be, a very significant amount of the popular support in the Lebanon, and we are going to continue to need to find a way to make sure that that popular support is engaged in the stability of the Lebanon, which is also a key British interest.
We're back to 4 minutes. Dame Louise Ellman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to congratulate the Home Secretary for bringing this much-needed measure before the House tonight. I am extremely concerned that my honourable friend, speaking for the opposition, was unable to give proper, full support to the banning of this terrorist organisation, the terrorist organisation Hezbollah in its entirety. Hezbollah are not our friends, and today would have been a very good opportunity to say so. Terrorism affects the whole of our society. And Hezbollah is a terrorist organisation acting throughout the world, and we've already heard examples of the way in which it has caused death and destruction in Argentina, the death of 85 people in the community centre, hundreds of thousands of people, including children, killed and facing starvation in Syria because of the activities of Hezbollah. But I would like to concentrate on the activities of Hezbollah here in this country, in London, and ask honourable members to think about what happens every single year on the streets of London on Al-Quds Day, the day designated by the late Ayatollah Khomeini to call for the destruction of Israel. Because of our current legislation, the Hezbollah terrorist flag is flown on the streets of London. The flag with its upturned rifle, because it is enabled, has a sticker put on it saying we are supporting the political wing of Hezbollah, is able to be flown without challenge. And I went to see the Metropolitan Police last year after this happened, and I was told very clearly, and that followed up by a letter to me, which said, as Parliament has chosen not to prescribe the whole of Hezbollah, being a member or supporter of the wider non-prescribed organisation is lawful, and those supporters can rightfully protest. And I was told very clearly that if the whole of the organisation was proscribed, those flags could not be flown. So my question to the Secretary of State, to the Home Secretary, is he absolutely sure the legislation he's proposing tonight will not allow any loopholes to allow that terrorist flag to be flown in the streets of London? It would be appalling if it could be. But I welcome very much the step that he is taking tonight. I hope it will have the full support of all honourable members in this House. Terrorism is abhorrent. Hezbollah is a terrorist organisation. To suggest it has two separate wings is an absolute fallacy. It is wrong for Hezbollah to operate, kill and maim people and propagate terrorism throughout the world, and that includes what is happening here in this country. I will declare.
Thank her for giving way, and also thank her for standing up for an honourable Labour tradition of opposing terrorism. Could I just mention to her, I don't know if she is aware that there was an opinion poll done by Comres for the Jewish News newspaper, which suggested that something like 80% of the public were in favour of banning Hezbollah.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his comments. Yes, I am aware of that opinion poll. It is a very important one, and in fact it is a timely reminder that while Hezbollah specifically targets Jewish people and Jewish organisations, it actually affects the whole of our society. So when we consider that issue, we should be looking at how the terrorist organisation Hezbollah affects the whole of our society, and that's why it is right for the Home Secretary to bring this order before us tonight, and I hope it is supported by everybody here.
Matthew Warford.
Deputy Speaker, the decision to proscribe Hezbollah in its entirety is long overdue, and I congratulate the Home Secretary on taking this action. I first called for proscription after I attended a demonstration outside Number 10 where the Prime Minister of Israel was visiting. And I not only heard anti-Semitic abuse, but I saw the flying of the Hezbollah flag. I pointed out to the Gold Commander and demonstrated to him through the Terrorism Act 2000 this was actually a criminal offence. He assured me that he had not only recorded the individuals, but action would be taken later, as his immediate priority was to keep the two factions apart. However, later on I found out from the Metropolitan Police that they would not be taking any action because of a Queen's Council opinion that they had, which showed that they felt that there were two wings of the party and therefore no offence had been committed. I've continued to attend the annual Al-Quds alternative rally each year, where I have witnessed further acts not only of intimidation, but also inflammatory actions by people waving the flag. In addition to this, I was very proud to present a petition of 1,000 of my constituents, and also I attended a petition from the Israel-Britain Alliance that is run by Michael McCann to Number 10, calling for the proscription of this organisation. And it was a great disappointment back on the 25th of January when both the Labour front bench and indeed the Conservative front bench and the government said that they would not wish to go down this route. Now, I'm sure members will remember that debate and the defence given on both sides. But it's just worth mentioning the different positions the government and the Labour opposition took. Now, any member here who voted against the Terrorism Act 2000 and indeed the Proscribe Organisation Amendment Order in 2001 is really stretching the bounds of credibility if they come along tonight and say that they actually support this when they clearly voted against the legislation. But secondly, and more importantly, and I'm sure many members will remember, the Home Secretary will not, because he wasn't Home Secretary at the time, there was the infamous briefing note that the Labour front bench had given its members, instructing them not to vote for proscription. And the rationale for this was clear. It was, they claimed, a threat to the Middle East peace process. And they said, full proscription could be a move against dialogue and meaningful peace negotiations in the Middle East. So it's worth asking the Labour front bench, why has that position changed? But I am concerned also with my own front bench, and on this occasion, their decision is welcome, and I'm not going to question their reasons for doing it. The government has taken the decision to proscribe Hezbollah in its entirety on the basis that it's no longer tenable to distinguish between the military and political wings of the organisation, and for that I welcome it. But what it actually does, it sends out a strong message. By proscribing Hezbollah, the Conservative government is demonstrating its commitment to anti-extremism, anti-Semitism, and its fight against anti-Semitism, and it also constrains the ability of Hezbollah to operate in the UK. But most of all, it protects community cohesion, and for that, Home Secretary, I salute you.
Graham Jones.
Deputy Speaker, I just want to speak very briefly about Hezbollah's role in Yemen in the human catastrophe that they are involved in. There's a clear link between Ansar Allah and Hezbollah in that they're both supported and funded by the Iranian government in this proxy war. Since the war broke out, that the Houthis, Ansar Allah, have unseated the legitimate government with the help of Hezbollah in training, expertise, weapons and munitions. Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah has publicly backed the Houthis, Ansar Allah, the partisans of God, in a speech on the 29th of June this summer, 2018, just gone, saying, "I and all my brothers and the resistance world should bow to the tribute of those fighters." And let's not forget what Ansar Allah's motto is that they are supporting: death to America, death to Israel, curse on the Jews. Let's be absolutely clear what they are standing behind. Furthermore, Hezbollah and Ansar Allah met in August last year in Beirut. The meeting consisted of Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah again, and the spokesperson for Ansar Allah, the partisans of God, Mohammed Abdul Salman. In this conflict, Hezbollah fighters have been killed on the battlefield in Yemen, and I think that this is further testament to their role in this conflict, and it is a terrible conflict that is exacting a huge price on the people of Yemen, and Hezbollah are part of that problem. I just want to say that a lot of this is coming in from an Iranian ship, the Savis, that's parked in the Bab al-Mandeb Straits, and it is supported by the Iranian government. I just want to finish with one conclusion on this, that when the peace talks in Stockholm took place, one of the conditions that Ansar Allah asked for in the prisoner transfer was for the injured Hezbollah fighters to be transferred safely to Oman, and that was one of the conditions, and that tells you everything you need to know about Hezbollah's role in the war in Yemen.
Joan Ryan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I unequivocally welcome today's announcement from the Home Secretary? I pay tribute to all those in this House and beyond who've worked long and hard to achieve this result, and I would like to thank the cross-party Backbench coalition which supported me in the debate I led on this topic last January, despite opposition from both government and opposition front benches. In particular, I wish to thank my honourable friend, the member for Liverpool Riverside, for her sterling efforts to ensure proscription and end the annual travesty of the flags of an anti-Semitic terror group being paraded on the streets of London. As the Community Security Trust rightly argued last year, the artificial division between Hezbollah's so-called military and political wings, one that Hezbollah itself denies, was highly damaging to social cohesion and community relations. It is thus very disappointing, but I'm afraid not surprising, to hear the words of the opposition front bench today. I hear that they're not opposing, but I really think they should be supporting. I would, however, thank the honourable gentleman for Torfine, who met with me last year after the debate, and for the listening ear he gave. Today's step is not simply a blow against terrorism and anti-Semitism, it also furthers the cause of peace. Let's be clear, Hezbollah has no desire to be part of any meaningful dialogue or peace process in the Middle East. And the opposition front bench does not need to take my word for it. Hezbollah has repeatedly and consistently made its aims and intentions very clear. It vehemently opposed the Oslo peace process and has fought any normalisation of relations between Israel and Arab countries. In its founding manifesto in 1985, Hezbollah says of Israel, "Our struggle will end only when this entity is obliterated. We recognise no treaty with it, no ceasefire and no peace agreements, whether separate or consolidated." On numerous occasions, most notably in 1993, 1996 and 2006, Hezbollah has sought to provoke conflicts with Israel, and it is readying itself for war once and again It's now an estimated 120,000 to 150,000 rockets and missiles, an arsenal larger than that of many states, and an army of 45,000 fighters. At the end of last year, in a further violation of UN Security Council Resolution 1701, a number of cross-border terror tunnels were discovered, all part of Hezbollah's plan of attack, conquering the Galilee, to launch assaults inside Israel's cities and towns, which Hassan Nasrallah publicly boasted about only last month. But it is not just the people of Israel to which Hezbollah poses a direct threat. It is heavily implicated in the war crimes of Iran and the Assad regime in Syria, having participated in battles in Aleppo and the killing of more than 1,000 civilians in the Ghouta district in the eastern suburbs of Damascus. It has destabilised Lebanon, bringing conflict to its people and murdering its political opponents, and it has conspired with its Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps masters to attack Western, Israeli and Jewish targets throughout the Middle East and Europe and South America. Although I know that it is not directly the responsibility of the Home Secretary, I now urge the Government to do more to work with our allies and friends in the region to counter the pernicious influence of Iran, the barely hidden hand behind Hezbollah, and the source of so much of the violence, sectarianism and terror which plagues the Middle East.
Sir Edward Davey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I pay tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Enfield North, who I think has led a campaign and sought to bring light to this issue and deserves huge credit for the measure before the House today. And can I say to the Home Secretary, I think his provisions, particularly with Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam wal Muslimin, JNIM, is very, very important that they're being proscribed. I think it's important to recognise the impact they have had in terrorist actions in Mali, Burkina Faso and elsewhere in the region, and we should worry about them, and he's right to prescribe them. Of course, the debate, Madam Deputy Speaker, is about the change that is being made here tonight on Hezbollah. Everyone, I think, across the House is concerned about Hezbollah. They have had 30 years of terrorist attacks. Moreover, we've seen in the rhetoric from their leaders, particularly Hassan Nasrallah, an anti-Semitic vein which is completely abhorrent. For example, when he said, "The Jews are a cancer which is liable to spread at any moment. If they all gather to Israel, it will save the trouble of going after them worldwide." This is an organisation which should be repudiated by everybody. Therefore, I think it is right that the government has kept the prescription of the political wing of Hezbollah under review and has sought to bring this measure to the House tonight. But like the spokesman for the SNP, I think it's right that we probe the government on why the change has been made, because opposition parties have had to listen to the government and follow the government. And the Security Minister of the government said relatively recently in this House that their military wings, and I quote him, Madam Speaker, their military wings are proscribed, but as Hezbollah forms part of the government in Lebanon and Hamas plays an active role in its part of the region as a member of the government, the prescription applies only to the military wing. Now, when I intervened and others have questioned the Home Secretary on this point, we've wanted to seek why there has been a change. That is a reasonable request, because we have followed the government's position before. All, I think, opposition parties have done, and we obviously are keen to keep unity on such a measure. That's why these questions are so important. And just as the member for Edinburgh South West asked these questions, so did the member for Reigate ask these questions. We saw on the 31st of January this year, after 9 months, the government of Lebanon formed. And in the new government of Lebanon, the health ministry is held by a member of parliament, I believe, from Hezbollah, and the Ministry of Finance has an ally who is linked to Hezbollah. And so it is not a reasonable question of the minister, given what the government was saying in this House last year and the year before, what has changed in that political assessment. And it's very important, I think, that the Home Secretary shares with the House that change in their analysis, because if he wants to take the whole House with him and keep the House and the country together on his moves, I think he needs to be clearer in that position. And may I, just moving on to the whole process of prescription, Madam Deputy Speaker, in my intervention on the Home Secretary, I made the point that the list of prescribed organisations is getting longer and longer, though time moves on, and the independent review of terrorism legislation, Lord Anderson, has made it clear that he thinks it needs to be updated and some organisations removed. So I do hope we can have a bit more from the Home Secretary, if he replies to this debate, on when is he going to keep that under review, when are prescription organisations going to come off, because that is not helpful, given that there are very severe penalties on people linking to those organisations, and if those organisations shouldn't be prescribed, people should not be in danger of being imprisoned.
We have to reduce the time limit again to 3 minutes. Mike Gapes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I took part briefly in the debate a year ago, in January, which my good friend from Enfield called. And it was very clear at that time that the government were uncomfortable about the position that existed. The Mayor of London, the Labour Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, had come out very strongly calling for a total ban on Hezbollah, not just the military but also the political wing, following the flags that were on demonstrations in the centre of London and slogans that were chanted which were clearly threatening and intimidatory towards British citizens. And it seems to me astonishing that the front bench on the Labour side is unable to recognise and support the clear call by the Mayor of our capital city that there should be a total ban on Hezbollah. When we had a Labour government in this country, we were tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime. It may be that today we are soft on terrorism and soft on the causes of terrorism. One of those causes of terrorism is that we do not confront and challenge the ideologies that drive it. Whether it is terrorism that comes out of hatred of other communities in the United Kingdom, or whether it comes out of a warped distortion of a faith, we have globally different terrorist organisations and they have to be challenged and confronted and dealt with. People in this country, as well as in other countries, have to be protected. And we are facing a real challenge if we do not recognise the need to have tough but fair measures of security for our community as a whole. And in Britain today, there are people who are afraid because we are allowing terrorist organisations and their supporters to parade and threaten and challenge. We need to be very clear that this decision that we will take tonight has to be followed up by action to enforce what we are about to agree. It is no good Parliament legislating and then not enforcing it. So the message has to go out to the Metropolitan Police, and it has to go out to local authorities, and it has to go out to different institutions in our country that there is no place for terrorists or terrorist apologists or terrorist organisations in UK society.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's a genuine pleasure to follow my honourable friend, the member for Ilford South. He's still very much my friend and is one of the most honourable people that I have had the privilege to know. And, Mr. Deputy Speaker, there is a long and proud tradition, a strong and proud social democratic tradition in the Labour Party of confronting and facing down murderous, hateful ideology. And I deeply regret, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that that proud tradition has not found expression at the front bench dispatch box this evening, but it will find expression on the backbenches, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm here to support the government unequivocally and without hesitation, not simply because I have to go back to my constituency and look the people who sent me here in the eye, but also because when I go home this evening, I have to be able to look myself in the eye, in the mirror too. And there is no doubt about what it is that the government seeks to ban and confront in this motion. Hezbollah make no distinction between their political and their military wings, and it's farcical that this government and this country for too long has drawn such a distinction. We've already heard the words of the Deputy Secretary General of Hezbollah, Naim Qassem, but let's hear some more words from him. He says, and I quote, "The history of the Jews has proven that regardless of the Zionist proposal, They are a people who are evil in their ideas. Or Hassan Nasrallah, God imprinted blasphemy on the Jews' hearts, and he said if we searched the entire world for a person more cowardly, despicable, weak and feeble in psyche, mind, ideology and religion, we would not find anyone like the Jew. And he says, notice I do not say Israeli. Mr. Deputy Speaker, that's what we're up against. That's the sort of stomach-turning anti-Semitism. It's the sort of conduct, I'm afraid, in the Labour Party gets you a reminder of conduct letter these days. But some of us will not be bystanders to Jew hatred. And look at their murderous terrorism as well, the slaughter of innocent people around the world. There is no doubt that Hezbollah is a violent, murderous, barbaric cult. And of course it is right the government has therefore taken this decision. And it's not just about the operations they've mounted in their own country. And I'll certainly give way.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. Does the honourable member agree with me that while this sends a message to the world, it also sends a message to our communities about community cohesion, which is that words have consequences and politics is as important as the military wing in terms of tackling terrorism?
I wholeheartedly agree with my honourable friend in what she says, and it just underpins why the decision the government is putting before us this evening is welcome. If overdue, it is very strongly welcome. I'll give way once more.
Friend for giving way. I listened very carefully to the words of the opposition front bench. But does he agree with me that not opposing is just not good enough? And we cannot be neutral in the face of an anti-Semitic terrorist organisation?
I do agree with the honourable member. I have not seen a parliamentary Labour Party briefing on this topic, which is regrettable. It means I don't know the lines to take, so I've had to just come up with my own. And I would just say quite plainly, simply and unequivocally, it's not good enough to simply say we won't be opposing. We should be making it clear that we would troop through the lobby and vote for it if there's a division. That's what people across the country want to hear. That's what people in my constituency want to hear. And finally, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I welcome the fact that Hezbollah flags won't be flown on the streets of our capital city, and I strongly support the leadership of the Mayor of London on this issue too. But let's not also lose sight of what they are doing right now in Syria. Syria Solidarity Campaign, Syria Solidarity UK are quite right to say it's not just about flag waving and about what's going on here. We must not lose sight of what's happening in Syria too. And I will continue, for as long as my constituents send me to this place, I will sit here proudly as a Labour MP from a strong social democratic tradition, standing up for the values that our party was founded to champion.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can I say at the outset that I commend the words and the way in which the Secretary of State, the Home Secretary, has introduced this matter to the House. I think every time he speaks, he grows with stature, both within this place and indeed across our nation, and I commend him for the strong stand that he is taking on these matters. Indeed, when I walk into this chamber each day, I walk under an arch that bears a memorial to 3 members of this House murdered by the Provisional IRA. Murdered, of course, by their actions, Robert Bradford, Erin Eve and Ian Gow, murdered by their actions, but encouraged by the words of those who give succour to those people, those who would pay lip service and be apologists for those gangsters and terrorists. It's essential, therefore, that we send a strong message to those people who would give succour that there is no room for their words, and that their words must also be condemned, and condemned thoroughly. Hizballah was responsible, and I appreciate the points that have been made across this House tonight about Hizballah, but Hizballah was responsible for the deaths of 85 people in 1994, bombing of a Jewish community in the centre of Buenos Aires, and remains a threat to Jewish communities around the world, launching deadly attacks against civilians in Israel, Bulgaria, and planning attacks in other places such as Cyprus. Indeed, I remember standing in the southern district of Israel, holding the remains of a rocket fired by Hezbollah terrorists at school children. The absolute hatred that goes into those people to fire at school children as they would go about normal life, and yet they faced attack and threat. Many have said tonight about the intentions of Hezbollah. It's not about an attack in Israel. It's about attacking world Jewry and about an attack on an entire community. And they were made clear, those intentions were made clear in 1992 when they stated that the war is on until Israel ceases to exist and the last Jew in the world has been eliminated. The hatred behind those words, the absolute condemnation, I think, comes from their own mouths. So we support entirely the actions that have been taken. But I would ask the Home Secretary to consider again the Muslim Brotherhood and adding them to this list also. Indeed, it was on the 7th of December in this House in 2017 when the then Foreign Secretary made it clear that he was considering prescribing and pushing for the prescription of Muslim Brotherhood. And I think it's essential that the Home Secretary would look at that organisation and see if they have come to the standard where that organisation too must be prescribed. I believe it is, and I believe that those organisations that encourage terror and mouth off terrorism and radicalise people, they too should face that condemnation that Hezbollah is facing in here today.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. First of all, can I also welcome the Home Secretary's comments and statement today, the action to recognise this group for what it is. It sends a very strong message to the world and to those who wish to do us harm that the UK government abhors terrorism in any form. Hezbollah, as we all know, is a well-funded, powerful terrorist organisation which has a history of targeting British interests, including well-documented links to attacks on British forces in Iraq. They killed 85 people in Argentina. They killed 5 Israeli tourists in Bulgaria. A Hezbollah operative with a forged British passport in Cyprus had 8 tons of fertiliser to be used to make bombs against Jewish and Israeli targets. And according to the CIA, Mr. Deputy Speaker, Hezbollah's Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah has a history of being directly involved in many Hezbollah terrorist operations, including hostage-taking, airline hijackings and attacks against Lebanese rivals. So therefore I am delighted that our country is now joining the US, Canada, the Netherlands, Israel and the Arab League in prescribing Hezbollah in full. As well as involvement in terrorist and international terrorism, Hezbollah also plays a central role in the global drug trade, with a wave of recent arrests in Europe of suspects linked to Hezbollah. So does the Home Secretary share my concern about the criminal activities that Hezbollah operatives regularly engage in, including drug dealing and money laundering? And can he confirm that prescription will restrict Hezbollah's ability to undertake these criminal activities in the UK? And is there a force directly tasked with doing that? The Hezbollah have lost some 2,000 fighters in Syria. They do have an arsenal of 150,000 rockets and 45,000 fighters, and they have said that their rockets can hit any part of Israel, even Tel Aviv. So does the Secretary of State agree that Hezbollah is one of the most destabilising forces in the region? Yesterday, the Home Secretary stated Hezbollah is continuing in its attempts to destabilise the fragile situation in the Middle East, and we are no longer able to distinguish between their already banned military wing and the political party. So I want to thank the Home Secretary for taking and making this decision. And I think that everyone in this House and in the other place will support this motion to make our people and our country safer. These are the sort of people that need put off the streets permanently.
Home Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. A number of honourable members have spoken in support of the order today, and I want to thank them, including my right honourable friend, the member for Pressley Pembrokeshire, the honourable friends, the members for Reigate and Hendon, and honourable members for Liverpool, Riverside, Hyndburn, Enfield North, the right honourable gentleman for Kingston and Surbiton, and the 2 Ilfords, and North Antrim and Strangford, who also, the member for North Antrim also spoke passionately about the terrorism in Northern Ireland as well. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I just wanted to focus on 2 clear points. I mean, the first was the Honourable Lady for Edinburgh South West and the right honourable member for Kingston asked why now. I'll give 4 reasons. I mean, first of all, there is secret intelligence. I think the House understands why we can't share it, but the Security Minister did meet with the Shadow Home Secretary early on Privy Council terms and was able to share some of that information. There's plenty of open source information, especially in the last 12 months, where there's been a step change of activity by Hezbollah, in particular in Syria. There's the Prescription Review Group, which is a group of civil servants, FCO, Home Office, DFID and others that make an independent, objective assessment of the evidence that they have, and they have expressed a clear view in the case of all these organisations, but especially with respect to Hezbollah, that in its entirety it meets the definition of a terrorist organisation as defined under the 2000 Act. And also the FCO and DFID have looked again at the work they do in Lebanon, and they are clear that they can continue with that work and support the legitimate government of Lebanon and its people. My final point, Mr Deputy Speaker, is really to give an opportunity for the Shadow Minister, who I have a great deal of respect for. He has shown how he's very strong normally on these issues, but the House is still not clear, and I want to give an opportunity now with regards to Hezbollah. Does the Labour Party, the official opposition, support the proscription of Hezbollah, yes or no? If it hasn't been clear, Mr Deputy, I just want to give an opportunity. The Shadow Minister wishes not to take it. We can only infer that the answer is no, Mr Deputy Speaker, which is a great shame. Mr Deputy Speaker, it is right that we ban all three terrorist organisations to ensure that they cannot build support in the UK. I commend this to the House.
The question is that motion number 9 is on the order paper. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Aye. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.